we go. Okay, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight, as always on Mondays, except for holidays. Tonight, we are going to talk disclosures, and the importance of disclosures is basically the seller has an opportunity to tell the buyer in their written word everything they know about that property, about that home. And some do a better job than others. Sometimes some are coached by their agent, which we're not supposed to do, by the way. And there are often mistakes made. Let me get some of this other stuff out of here so I can focus on this and share. Okay, everyone seeing this real estate transfer disclosure statement?
Yes.
All right, perfect. Okay, so this real estate transfer disclosure statement is a requirement of the seller to give to the buyer when that seller is an owner occupant or an occupant with a living trust, or basically where they are alive and still in control of their trust, and basically have ownership of that property, but not outside the realm or into the realm of foreclosure or a beneficiary type of status. So let's say someone owns and occupies and lives in their home. They are supposed to provide a real estate transfer disclosure statement to the buyer when selling it. Let's say that someone lives in the home, but the home's in a trust. They are still in control of the trust. They're alive, living trust. So they still, in selling the property, even though it's in a trust in an entity, they still have to disclose to the buyer what they know about the property. The only folks that are exempt are REOs, because the banks have, or financial institutions have taken over the possession of the property. And they really, it's not fair to them. They really don't know what's going on. Even if they, send a crew in there to spot check, long-term, they don't know the history of the home. They just gave someone the money to buy the home that didn't pay them back. Or probate, someone's a beneficiary, or a trust, someone's a beneficiary, meaning someone passed away and passed it on to someone, a relative, child, grandchild, anyone like that. And that person never lived in the property. And even if they, let's say it's their parents' home and they lived there years ago, they haven't lived there for years, but they're a beneficiary. So if there's some kind of detachment in ownership completely, then that person is exempt. Okay, so this real estate transfer disclosure statement is required by everyone else. Now, what does it do? This basically is the seller's opportunity to tell the buyer in this document and one other that I will pull up what they know about the property, if there are any issues. Okay, so let's go to page 1. Well, let me point something out here right off the bat. There are some areas of this document that, if not completed, would deem the document, and this is arguable, but it may deem it as not complete and not deliverable from the seller to the buyer. It may have been delivered, but it was not delivered complete. And if it is not delivered complete, some of the attorneys that I've talked with say it's as though it hasn't been given to the buyer from the seller at all because it's not filled out right. So on page 1, there are some important areas that agents miss all the time. What I see honestly, about 50% of the time is on item number 1 right here, these 3 boxes right here. One of those boxes has to be checked for this document to be considered absolutely complete. Either the box that says inspection reports completed pursuant to the contract of sale receipt for deposit, the additional inspection reports or disclosures, or no substituted disclosures for this transfer. One of those boxes has to be selected. Usually the box that is the common sense box is that no substituted disclosures for this transfer, meaning that you're going to basically disclose what you know in these documents right here through your disclosures. You're not giving other reports only. You're getting clear and specific with this document, and actually one other that tails in with it called an SPQ, but we'll go to that one in a minute. I see these boxes empty probably 50% of the time. When I see these boxes empty right there, I say to myself, okay, I'm going to pass this along to the buyer. I'm going to pass this disclosure along to the buyer, but it is not truly complete. It's arguable that this document has been given to me and is not finished. So I will give it to my buyer to review, but I put it to the side. I'm not going to have my buyer sign it. I'm not going to sign it and return it. Honestly, my angle here or maneuver is I'm going to hold this to the side in case my buyer needs more time for something. Okay, if my buyer needs more time, I'm going to bring this out to the attention of the listing agent, and I'll explain in a few minutes why I would do that. Okay. There are also a series of boxes here to check. Let me let more people in here. To check for items that are in the home. Appliances, range, oven, microwave, dishwasher, trash compactor, so on and so forth. Now, any one of these boxes here that's checked that is not functioning, you have to explain down here to the best of your knowledge, are any of the above not an operating condition?
It's really good. Mhm.
Hold on, let's let some more folks in here. Okay. So even if it's not working, you can check it. Let's say the oven isn't working, you can check that there's an oven there and it's part of the sale, but here you are to, at the bottom, explain that it's not an operating condition. Okay. One of the other items that would deem the transaction once again, or I'm sorry, the document not complete either, is I see this happen about 50% of the time too, where they don't check the box on what type of sewer system the property has. Usually your sewer systems, whether you're rural or metropolitan, are going to be one of the either public sewer, meaning that your sewer, any kind of wastewater coming from the home is going through into the city system. Either that or it's going to be septic, which is more rural. Like let's say if you live inland valley, deep inland valley, up in canyons and things like that, a lot of the time those are going to be septic. What is septic? It's basically a massive tank buried usually in the front yard, and that is collecting all the wastewater coming out from the home. Now those need to get pumped, what they refer to as pumped and dumped every couple of few years, usually 2 to 3 years or so. And those are usually going to be, not connected into the street and washed off into the public sewers. So it's usually one or the other. Now the seller is supposed to check one or the other, but sometimes they don't. So to me, that would not be complete either. And I'll explain to you in a few minutes why these arguments can be important and how you could buy time. Okay. It also asks if there's a garage. Okay, is it attached? Is it not attached? Another area here that's often missed is the water heater, the water supply, the gas supply, if any. Most homes are going to have, I'd say most are going to have gas of some sort, but some are going to be electric entirely. But most of them are going to have some kind of gas utility to it. But here, the important thing is it's simple to check these boxes and tell us what they are, including the water supply. Is it city water? Is it well water? Is it private water company? What is it? Okay. Same thing with gas, if there is. Any one of these boxes not checked, it's an argument to say, honestly, that this isn't complete. You didn't tell us an important issue about utilities. Even though we can check into things ourselves, the seller is supposed to disclose to us. Another area that agents miss because they just don't seem it, as important as the others is what type of roof is there and the age of the roof. Many times the agents on the listing side, when I represent a buyer, will say, well, they don't know what type of roof it is. It was already here when they got here. They don't know how old it is because it was already here when they bought it. Well, CAR would prefer that you put something there. And if it is that you put, I don't know to each one of these, then that's fine. And I don't know is better than leaving it blank. Because leaving it blank, once again, these areas, any one of these areas missed can be deemed, even if it might seem menial, as an incomplete document because you're not answering some questions here, basically. Also, what I'll see a lot is they'll check a yes, that something's not functioning here or something's not right, but then they don't put an explanation. Once again, it's looked at as not complete. Now we go to the next page and it gets kind of tricky here, why they don't just put these two items together, because here it says, are you aware of any significant defects, malfunctions in any of the following systems? I don't know, myself, I thought they should just put these together. But these are referring to things like walls, ceilings, floors, insulation, roof, windows, doors, foundations, slab, driveways, sidewalks, plumbing, electric. Like I said, I'll get these when I'm representing a buyer quite a bit, and they check the yes box, but they don't explain. What does that mean to me? Once again, it's not complete, because anytime you answer yes to anything on this document and the SPQ, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, you have to explain why there is a yes there. Okay, in items C, in the C items, it asks a series of questions to answer yes or no. Are you, seller, aware of any of the following? Substances, materials, or products which may be an environmental hazard and so forth. Here's the thing. If you were to talk to a car attorney, they'll tell you, and the reason I say this, because I do get a TDS here and there where they don't check some boxes. Once again, it's not complete. The seller has to check every box, but sometimes they worry, well, I don't know. Well, guess what? In the eyes of CAR, checking no is the same as I don't know. Checking no is the same as I don't know. It's not holding them to blame and accountable and whatever. It's better to say, no, I don't know, than not say anything at all. Because if you don't say anything at all, then this document is not complete. Even if you don't check one of these boxes right here, just one of them makes it not complete. You'd be surprised how I will get a TDS where this isn't checked. Oh, by the way, I missed right here where it asks, is the property occupied by the seller or not? That one's missed all the time too. So let's say that's not checked. That's not checked. What kind of sewer isn't checked? A yes box is checked here, but nothing's explained. I mean, your argument and your case grows bigger and bigger for you to say, you may as well not even given this to me because it's not complete. Okay, so let's see some of the other questions that it does ask. Features of the property shared in common with adjoining landowners, such as walls, fences. Honestly, unless you live in a rural area where you're not bordering anybody, but even if you're in a rural area, there's maybe a home somewhere, and a lot of the time there's a gate, some kind of gate or something. Most of the time it would be appropriate to check yes and then just explain why. Common fence or something. Most of the metropolitan homes, obviously have fences shared most of the time, not always, but most of the time, sometimes shared driveways and things like that. So you try to be as specific as possible with this document because it is a statutory document, meaning in the state of California, it is required if you fall into the category, as I mentioned, where you're an owner occupant or you're in a living trust where you're still in control of it, you're calling the shot and so forth. Try to be as specific as possible. Oh, and big key here too is do not fill this in for your client. Back in the day, a lot of agents were saying, you know what, this is too complicated for my seller. I'm just going to check all the boxes and so forth and have them sign. Well, let's say something does happen. A buyer buys a property, buys a home, and there's a legal issue, and it gets very legal. And buyer and seller are brought in front of an arbitrator, or who knows, a judge, and agents get dragged into it too. And these sellers claim is, well, I wouldn't have checked that box, but I didn't even do it. My agent did it for me. That's a bad day for you as an agent. So this document right here, especially this document, you give it to the seller. You can help guide them by asking them, to get commonsensical about things. And if there are any detailed areas here, yeah, sit down with them and explain it in a little more in depth, but don't fill it out for them. Don't fill it out for them. This is supposed to be their own words type of disclosure here. Okay. It also asks about any settling, things like that. And once again, there's no harm in them saying, well, I have no idea. I don't want to put yes. I don't want to put no. I'm scared. No, well, no means I don't know. It's the same thing. It also asks about neighborhood noise problems, nuisances, of course, any HOA items and so forth.
So Frank, I have a question.
Yes.
If your client does not speak or read English or write, how do you go about that?
You're going to have to translate it, because it's worth a few dollars to get somebody involved, because you don't want them just checking boxes here and maybe getting themselves into trouble. Because if anything's going to come up in a legal dispute, it's going to be something not disclosed here. Remember, disclose. People don't get in trouble when they over disclose. They get in trouble when they don't disclose enough or everything. So I would bring someone in who can translate the language and get, a real clear definition of what's going on in here with this document. When I have a buyer or a seller, I do a Zoom consultation, and I go over these documents, especially with the buyer, on what this means, what it's all about, all these disclosures, but in particular the TDS, this one, the SPQ, which we're going to talk about in a minute, and the AVID, the Agent Visual Inspection Disclosure. So, I know that there are many folks out there and all kinds of different cultures, languages, everything, buying property all the time. And we really, truly have the main, obviously, documents are in English. So do your best to find someone that can interpret. All right, please.
Thank you.
Don't try and wing this document. Really read it yourself and see what it's saying. And it's really common sense. You read it, it's going to say things like any notices of abatement or citations against the property. If they don't know, they don't know. But these are things, and this is why there's a fine line conversation here with brokers and agents and their sellers. A lot of brokers will say you're the listing agent, but you are not to go down to the city and find out anything about this property at all. Let the eventual buyer's agent and their buyer find out everything. Okay, I see that point. It's hold me harmless. I had no idea anything like that. But me, truly, as a listing agent, I feel like, you know what? I need to know everything about this property. Everything. Has anyone ever passed away in here, gotten killed in here? Has there been any insurance claims, any kind of issues with the property? Are there illegal this, that, or the other thing? Because a good agent for the buyer and a good buyer are going to do their, you've heard of the term due diligence, their deep dive into the property. And they're going to find things out that you may not know as a listing agent, and you can get caught off guard. You can get caught with the buyer's agent when they know more than you about your own listing. That's not a good feeling right there. Okay. Now, am I going to just start handing over documents and do all the research for my seller? No, it's a collaborative effort, you know. Maybe they never looked into things when they bought it. I'm going to encourage them to look into the things at the city just as much as the buyer is going to. And some would say, well, it's better that they don't know anything. But can that be used as an excuse? I didn't know. You've been living in there for 15 years and you didn't bother to know anything about your property, that you've been living under violations, unpermitted this, that, and whatever. But more than likely, if there were any citations or violations, it probably would catch up to them after a while, because the city might take a while for them to give them notices out and start fining them, but they eventually would. But there are some things that if the city doesn't know about, like when the current owner bought it, maybe someone put a new roof on, that buyer didn't bother to go down to the city to see if there was a permit for it. They lived fine under that roof, but it is not permitted. And that's the point. It's just not permitted. It's things like that it's just best to know, because there's no harm in you letting the buyer know in disclosures, hey, when we bought the property, we were told the roof was new, but we couldn't find a permit at the city for it. And we're letting you know also, when you go down there, you're probably not going to find one too. Buyers will still buy. But as long as you're letting these buyers know these things ahead of time, and especially in writing, and they sign off on it, hey, that puts you in a better position. Rather than you claiming, I don't know nothing about nothing. The buyer finds out the roof is unpermitted. Who knows? Sometimes you never know if they might trigger something at the city. And if that transaction doesn't go through, who knows? And maybe the city knows about it now. If anything, seller, disclose everything. Find out everything you can about your home, minus crawling under the home and going in the attic. I understand that. But as far as the paper trail, when that owner now was a buyer is really when they should have done that. Their agent should have very much stressed them to do that. And a lot of agents just don't. They just kind of like leave it to, well, we'll let the inspector point something out. I'll tell the buyer a couple of times, go check it out, whatever. And it isn't until after the buyer owns the property and starts to have the domino effect. Let's say, for example, they buy the property and they kind of thought that patio in the back, that enclosed patio, was unpermitted, but they really didn't care. Their agent didn't really, stress the issue, and the transaction closed. Now that buyer 6 months later decides, I want to get new windows, but I'm going to do it right. I'm going to get it with permit. So they get a contractor who pulls permits. City inspector comes down to see the windows and notices that there's this enclosed patio that isn't in there. They basically bring the paper trail with them. And they see it's not in the drawing. They don't see a permit pulled for it, nothing, but they see this enclosed patio. It doesn't seem to fit in the living square footage in their head and all that. Next thing you know, they're calling it out. Buyer's upset. Well, seller didn't tell me. Listing agent didn't tell me. My own agent didn't tell me. Well, somewhere, like I said, that's your client as a buyer's agent, but you need to put in writing, you need to stress to them that they need to look into things. They need to see if there's what the history of the home is from the time it was constructed and over the course of time, any kind of permit that's been pulled for it. And, obviously common sense things that they either see on the MLS, if it says new this, new that, look into those things that are major, like roof or electric panel. When they see things like that, those are things that are supposed to have a permit pulled. So I would have them go to the city, because they're saying it's got a new electric panel, it's got a new roof, it's got a new enclosed patio. If you don't see those permits there, it doesn't mean you can't buy this property, but it just means that there isn't a permit here. And if you ever do anything in the future that requires a permit, and an inspector comes down here, they may come here for one reason and catch you for another one. That makes sense?
Yes.
I'm hoping so, because that really happens and people get really upset, honestly, when they should be really upset with themselves more than anything. But the buyer's agent, the buyer's agent, play a part in that, because you have to take this part to them and get them taking it seriously. They need to play their role. They're not just there to go to inspections and sign loan documents and yeah, hand over a lot of money. They have to do their duty during the transaction also. Okay. So once again, if any of these boxes are checked yes, and they do not put an explanation here, the document is not considered complete. Now, the third page is pretty much the signature page for sellers, buyers, and agents. Now, our company does stress that they would like us to have an agent visual inspection disclosure. I'll show you that in just a few minutes. But sometimes agents just like to check this box and say agent notes no item for disclosure. That is not a good idea. There is something, lots of some things that you can bring up characteristics about any property, whether it's a fixer condition or whether it's sparkling and you can do surgery in every room clean type of property. You could at least describe the property inside, the flooring, a ceiling fan, a crack in the ceiling, something. So at least with our brokerage, EXP, they would ask that you do some kind of AVID. And we'll go into that, what the AVID is, in a few minutes. The next document that ties into this document is the SPQ, the Seller Property Questionnaire. Okay. Now, this comes into play if the TDS is brought into the fold, the SPQ should be brought into the fold as well. Okay. Let me pull up one real quick. There's an ESD. I know I hate to abbreviate, but today's kind of abbreviation day. The exempt seller disclosure. And this is actually a good sample. The exempt seller disclosure is for those that I described that do not have to do the TDS. They are a beneficiary seller. Grandma passed away, left it to them through probate or in a will or through a trust. Now, this is just a one-pager that's going to ask some pretty important questions, but the seller will only have to fill out this one page because the way it's looked at is that that seller inherited this property. They don't know the A through Z's in the entire history. How are they to? They didn't live there all these years. Grandma did. Well, you probably should have been visiting grandma and you know a lot about it, but that's a different story. So it asks a number of questions, and you'll see here a big boo-boo that somebody made. You're not to do this, is allow your seller or you yourself create your own category. They got concerned about answering these last two questions about plumbing fixtures on the property that are non-compliant or any other material facts or defects. Instead of checking yes or no, which remember, once again, no means I don't know. They decided to not check either and write I don't know. They created their own third category. This document is not complete. All they had to do was this one. This really takes a lot of burden off of them, and they decided not to do it. So guess what? In this transaction, we actually got extra time because of this document, because it was not complete, because they have to give us some kind of disclosure. They didn't have to give us a TDS, but they got to give us something. They're not exempt from giving us the exempt disclosure, and they didn't even complete that. Okay. But let's go back to the SPQ. The Seller Property Questionnaire. Now, that Seller Property Questionnaire starts with one of the biggest issue topics in real estate. You might not hear about it a lot, but it happens pretty common. It asks, within the last 3 years, has there been a death of an occupant on the property? That's an important one to some folks. Some folks are not told the truth about that, and later on they find out. I would tell my seller, look, you need to look at me like I'm your counsel. I'm your attorney. I need to know everything. There is nothing that you need to hide from me. I need to know everything because guess what? There's a buyer for everything at the right price. This property had chainsaw massacre in it. Okay. Not everyone's flavor of the day there once they find out. But we don't tell them, and it did happen, we got a problem. You may have a problem even after 3 years. And that's one of the biggest questions. What had happened 3 years and a week ago? Me, myself, I still have a serious conversation with my sellers about, it just is really, truly always better to disclose. That's my opinion. Because even though someone might get upset and the statute time is passed, still there are people who say, I'm gonna go after you anyways. They're going to take time out of your day. You're going to miss work. You're going to spend money, whether you recoup that money legally, protecting yourself, knowing full well you're going to go in and win. It still disrupts your life. So to me, I have my sellers, I have them put some serious thought about just disclosing everything, regardless of timelines. If it was a far down way back when timeline, okay, I understand it. And they really don't want to do it, I'm not going to force them to do it, because they can just honestly answer this question. And they really only have to say anything if it's within the last 3 years and not beyond that. I've heard so many people in our industry that are at a very high level, and when they get to this topic right here, they never really get definitive about it. They say, well, if it was 3 years and 2 months and the seller really doesn't want to put it, then they don't have to. They could check the box no. And I've had those same high level people say, but you, because you know it, Mr. or Mrs. Agent, you should put it in your Avid. Well, that could trigger your seller. Hey, I told you I didn't want to say that. I didn't want that known. And that's when it becomes a tug of war for you and your morals and your ethics and your values, because you want to do what you feel is the right thing, but legally your seller doesn't have to, because it only asks, is it within the last 3 years? And if the answer is no, the answer is no. Like I said, when you get to that topic, I would still express to my client about that. Doesn't mean it's over and done. That doesn't mean that someone's not going to get very upset and try and come after you. In the end, they may not be victorious, but they're victorious in disrupting your life. That's just the way it is. Because remember, when a buyer buys a home in whatever neighborhood it is, obviously they're probably going to get to know their neighbors, and unless they're just total inverted, isolated people, but they're probably going to meet the neighbors. They're going to make friends in the neighborhood, and people talk. Someone's going to bring over an apple pie and bring it up, like, whoa, how, or at the barbecue, how is it living in the Michael Myers house? Oh yeah, some kid wiped out his whole family. Buyer was never told. They're upset. They call a lawyer. Who knows? Maybe the attorney says, well, this isn't going anywhere. But you might find someone who's willing to take the challenge and say, yeah, we're going after somebody. It happens. It happens. So I would do my best to just put the potential, if not absolute finalized legal consequences, but the disruption that it can cause. There's a buyer for everything, for every property at the right price. So some of the other questions that ask here, like the second one is the Breaking Bad question. Has there been an order from government health officials identifying the property as being contaminated by methamphetamine? I know some might say, well, that's ridiculous, but back during the foreclosure meltdown era, I did have an agent friend, and their client bought a property and they had an infant child. And very soon after they moved in, for whatever reason, that the child was licking stuff, and I think they were licking a wall, and they got ill, and they got, they went to the doctor and whatever, and they got tested, and it just showed amphetamine in their system. Isn't that incredible? Why? Because the residue, I guess someone was Breaking Bad in that house, like cooking drugs in that house, and it went on the wall, and the baby licked it off. Really, stuff like this really happens. It really does. But like I said, if you don't know about it, you're not sure about it, You don't have to check a yes, you check a no. Why? Because no is the same as I don't know. That clear, everyone, about the no being the same as I don't know?
Yes.
Okay. Second page, it asks about repairs and alterations. Another one where sellers like to sweep things under the rug and not tell the truth. Just tell it, because a good agent for a buyer and a good buyer is going to look into these things anyways. So if you claimed to, to really enhance the appeal of your home, you put new this, new that, new roof, new plumbing, new electric panel, new this, new pool, all these things. And then the buyer looks into it, buyer's agent looks into it and sees that there's no permit, no permit, no permit, no permit. But here you check no, I don't know, when it asks you any alterations, modifications. And sometimes I've seen where they've checked no here when their description on the MLS is completely the opposite. New this, new that, new this, new everything. So let's get it straight and let's have your stories match. If ever your story should match, it should be on your TDS and your SBQ, because this is the seller's word to the buyer of everything they know. This is putting it on the table. Just get it over with right here. Honestly, a lot of buyers agents don't go over these documents with their buyers. The buyer signs them, send it back. Guess what? If there was something in there that may be thought of as damaging later, the buyer signed it. The buyer signed it. That's a big leaning in favor to the seller document now, because the buyer signed it. What's their excuse? I didn't read it. My agent just put it in front of me. I signed everything they put in front of me. That's not really a good excuse. Your buyer really needs to understand what's going on in here. And like we said earlier, if there is a language barrier, get someone in there, spend some quality time, spend an hour, go through this in detail and let the buyer know what they are signing here. Now, here's a good example of any boxes that are checked yes have to be explained. So here it says permitted addition, painted exterior, home water efficient toilets, double windows, electric water heater, tankless, blah, 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 blah. So basically they broke it down. Hey, I checked some boxes. Yes, I did some stuff to it. Here's what I did. Sometimes sellers or listing agents will get a nice, clean, clear breakdown or bullet point of all the things they did and attach it to this. I think that's a good idea. Okay. It asks about any structural systems issues, any appliance issues, and so forth. Any disaster relief, insurance, or civil settlements. Once again, don't sweep things under the rug. If the seller had any kind of insurance claims or anything against the property, there was a fire in the kitchen, a flood in the bathroom or something like that, insurance was involved, more than likely the buyer's insurance company is going to catch it, because it seems to be all tied into one national system where they're going to catch things. They're going to see if there was a claim. So pretending it didn't happen or just don't say anything, it was fixed, let them figure it out for themselves. No, disclose, disclose, disclose. It does ask about pets. They did the right thing here. They checked yes, they said 2 dogs. Some of these things don't apply, that there's no pools or anything like that. Also in the area, item number 13, condominiums, common interest developments, even if it's a single family home, it's good to put something in here. Sometimes I see these blank. Now you could take it for what it is. Well, it's a no-brainer. There's no association, but we're supposed to fill out everything. So if you don't check all those boxes, no, which is the same as I don't know, put something here, NA, not applicable, because it's not a condo association, a townhome, or in an association or anything that has to do with any kind of monthly. It asks if there are any title, ownership liens, legal claims. Like I said, especially if it's okay, I had a seller, I sold their property in Torrance. They told me everything about the property in and out. They did tell me there was a leak in an upstairs bathroom. It leaked into the downstairs bathroom, but they had it fixed by a professional contractor. I asked for the estimates, everything. They gave me that stuff, but they didn't tell me that and on the estimates too, it didn't mention anything about insurance companies. But it turns out about 3-4 days before we're supposed to close, he's telling me, I'm so glad this is almost over. I was kind of worried about, the buyer and their thoughts on the leak that would happen upstairs, because everything was fixed, is great and not even noticeable, whatever. I'm just so glad that was over. Whew. Good thing I didn't have to pay for it. Okay, wait a minute. What do you mean, good thing you didn't have to pay for it? Mom paid for it, dad paid for it. Who paid for that? Well, the insurance company. Why didn't you tell me there was an insurance company involved? And actually, the buyer, it was just coincidental. The buyer's agent called me and told me, that sometimes they get the insurance at the tail end. Who knows why? Okay. But they told me, hey, did you know there was a claim again the same day? The same day. So I had, after that conversation with my buyer, I told him, you need to get me the paperwork. He said, I need to go down to my storage and I'll dig it out and whatever. I said, call the insurance company, go to something, get me something, because I'm going to ASAP that over to the buyer, because that's a disclosure. Well, before I even got to call him, the agent called me and told me the same thing. So see, there's no sweeping under the rug, even when you think, they missed it. It's gone bye-bye. It's not going to come up. It could. So always do things, in my opinion, like it could be brought up. It could be found out. It could be disclosed. Just bring it up. It does also ask about neighborhood noise, nuisance, or other problems from sources such as, but not limited to, the following: neighbors, traffic, parking, congestion, airplanes, trains, light rail, subway, so on, and so on. Okay, I had a client quite a while back, my partner and I, and young couple buying a home, their first home. And the first time I went to show it to them, I noticed right off the bat this barking dog next door. This just like Cujo dog. Would insurance with price or just legal issues with not disclosing? Well, it depends. I mean, if there was an insurance claim, I'm sorry to skip back, but someone asked a question here. If there was a claim against a property and it was fixed by a contractor, likely it was probably fixed in a workmanlike manner. It's probably done right, because the insurance companies don't like to pay for. I know they want to save money, but they want it done. They want it done right, because they understand the liability issue also. So it's probably done. Psychologically, who knows? The buyer might have some concerns for the future, might ask for a little bit of just in case credit. I don't know. It's case by case. But usually if you can provide them with the bids or the sign off that the work was completed, that should be good enough. And it was probably done and done right, because the insurance companies really want these things done by licensed, bonded, insured contractors. Okay. Okay, and I'll call you, Priya, after about your transaction. Okay. Let's see. It asked for about any governmental issues, ongoing or contemplated eminent domain. These are things, once again, that buyers should look into the city and ask these questions and find these things out. If you don't know what eminent domain is, it's let's say someone owns a home by a freeway. And over time, that freeway is just so congested, such an issue that the city basically comes in motion to say, well, we need to expand this freeway. And in order to expand this freeway, we need your property and everyone else's property running along this side of the freeway to expand it. So eminent domain basically gives the city, and I'm not a lawyer, but basically the authority to buy you out so they can clear you out so they can expand that freeway. And there's not a whole lot that can be done about it. Okay, because part of the understanding when you're buying a home is that there are changes in zoning, there are just things that can happen over time. So your buyer should do their best to find out about any upcoming expansions or any kind of zoning changes and things like that with the property. Because sometimes buyers want to buy a property because it's got such a large lot. Here's another one that can be a problem. It's got such a large lot, I can see myself building another unit in the back. And then later they find out that, well, it used to be zoned R2, and you'll see a lot of other homes that have 2 units on there, but now they're R1, they won't let you build another one, which is not the case usually right now, because the statewide policy is basically to add more housing, and they're getting pretty loose about letting people do ADUs, all these additional units, converting garages even. And it depends city to city. Some are really, against it and make it a challenge to do it to the point where people don't. But for the most part, a lot of cities are really opening things up for people to add these additional units. But once again, the buyer should look into these things. Okay. Don't let your buyer just be riding in the passenger seat during this ride. They need to get involved. They need to find out what's going on with the place that they're going to pay a lot of money for and call their own. It also does ask for any reports, inspections, disclosures, anything like that. So remember this, if you get a buyer that gets accepted on an offer and there was an escrow before your escrow, basically a failed buyer in front of you, or maybe not necessarily failed, but a withdrawn buyer in front of you. Any reports, anything that buyer did, an inspection report, a termite report, anything like that, is supposed to be handed over to you also. Even though that's not, you didn't hire that inspector, you didn't schedule that termite or whatever, all those things that the seller possesses from the previous buyer is supposed to be handed over to you and your new buyer. Everyone understand that?
So Frank, you have to put that, some kind of request in writing for that?
No, the contract, the disclosure, all of these things stated in here. Like right here itself, it's asking the seller, are there any reports, inspections, disclosures, warranties, anything? And if there was a previous escrow and they don't check the box yes, they're saying they don't have it, but I would really press that listing agent as a buyer agent. Did you have anything? Did you get to that point?
Okay.
It just comes down to the ethics of the agent on the other side, because I know some agents that have tried to suppress the inspection report from the previous buyer if it fell out, because the way they look at it is, whoa, okay, this new buyer is going to have an inspection, and then piled on top of it is his previous inspection. It's going to scare the buyer away. Well, if it's ever found out, the listing agent and the seller should be more scared, because they withheld information. There may have been something important in there that wasn't caught from the buyer's new inspection. It happens, but any reports, anything, city inspection, anything that's documented on record, anything like that is supposed to be handed from the previous transaction to the new transaction. Make sense?
Yes. And how do you go about if there was a report done, but the listing agent doesn't want to just, knows about it and doesn't want to give it to you?
I would show them, I know, here's how I know. It's hard to get around it,
Mm-hmm.
Like, how would you know? Maybe you were at the property and the agent from the previous buyer drove by. You guys had a conversation, something like that. I think that would test the listing agent's fear factor enough for him or her or whoever to pony up and give it to you, because you've got a third party who was involved in your transaction that, if called upon, might reveal that.
Yeah, I've gotten agents who just refuse to, even though they
Well,
I know. And so anyway.
Well, then that's when, this is what I would do. I'd call CAR, California Association of Realtors attorneys, let them know what's going on. They're going to tell you, you tell them that they need to hand it over because that's a disclosure and it's a required disclosure. And if they don't give it, we're not letting our contingencies go. We're not moving forward. We're not doing anything. You can't make us to because you're holding back information. It might be vital information. And then your buyer at some point's got to make a decision. Are they going to walk away from it until they get that? Or are they going to move forward? Because at some point it becomes, there's an expiration of your contingency period, and whether you feel like you should get it or not, they start sending notices to perform. It just gets to the point, do you want to move forward or not? But they're supposed to give it to you. There are things that happen in our industry, unfortunately, that people find ways around. Like me, I'll admit, I'm looking for angles and loopholes all the time, but I'm looking at them within the boundaries of our contracts, our disclosures, our documents. I'm not breaking rules. I'm only utilizing maneuvers based on what is given to me within the transaction. But there are people, let's say, for example, another thing that happens sometimes is your buyer writes an offer. A home's been sitting there for 65 days. Your buyer writes an offer. You get this seller multiple counter offer back. You say to yourself, well, wait a minute. There's someone else coming after the property too? Could happen, yeah. Call the agent. Hey, wait a minute. Is there another offer? Oh yeah, we just got 2 over the weekend. All of a sudden, it could happen. Maybe if there was a price reduction and that's what drew your buyer in, it could have drawn others in. But sometimes listing agents will send you a seller multiple counter offer when they don't have any other offers. What's their psychology there? They're trying to make your buyer feel a sense of urgency, like you are competing against someone, even if they know they don't have any other offers. How do you prove that they don't have other offers? You ask them to show you the other offers, and then it gets really complicated. But things like that happen. It just happens. I hate to hear it or see it happen, but it does. There are just some agents out there that they're just doing things however they see fit. It's unfortunate. Okay. So we are going to go to what I feel is the third important document in here. And this is actually everything to do with you, the agent, whether you're on the buy side or the list side. This is the agent visual inspection disclosure. Now, this is the agent's opportunity to give their obvious and visible interpretation of the property. It says right here, California law requires, within limited exceptions, that a real estate broker or salesperson, collectively an agent, conduct a reasonably competent and diligent visual inspection of reasonably and normally accessible areas of certain properties offered for sale. Okay. Here it says, though, you as an agent, California law does not require the agent to inspect the following: areas that are not reasonably and normally accessible, like a crawl space under a house. Now you might say, hey, there's a hole there, I can crawl in there, but it's not normal for an agent to crawl into a hole. An inspector, yes, but not an agent. Or even an attic access. It's not normal for the agent to get up on a ladder and go and jump into an attic. You don't have to do that. And I don't recommend you do. Areas offside of the property. You don't necessarily have to walk up and down the street and go to the park and, anything like that. They're just asking you to give a reasonable and normally accessible view of the property and opinion of it. It says here, you don't have to check into public records or permits. I know it says that there. I just think myself, it puts you at odds when that agent for the buyer who is encouraged to dig deep finds out more than you or your seller know about that property. I don't know. It could give them the advantage. It could give them leverage. At least if the seller knows about unpermitted things or issues and things like that, they're somewhat prepared. Okay, well, I put in the disclosures. This is about all I know about the property. If they come at me asking for repairs or maybe credit for repairs, I'm kind of ready for that because I kind of already know the things that me as a seller, if I were a buyer, what would bother me. And I've had sellers that were very firm on their frank, this is as is. I'm not lifting a finger or doing anything. Well, they've never crawled under their house or gone into the attic, but the buyer's inspector does and comes back with all kinds of rosy pictures of issues, leaks, wood rot, all kinds of things under and over the house. And sometimes that can change a seller's mind. Sellers do sometimes have a change of heart. Like, okay, well, you know what? I didn't know that was going on. This is a great, nice buyer, very friendly. I'm happy that this home is going to them. Yeah, I'll give them some credit or I'll do some fixes and things like that. They do change their mind. Okay. But honestly, every sale really is as is, but the buyer still has a right to have an inspection and the buyer has a right to put in a request for repair for actual repairs or credits. The seller is not obligated to do either one of those, fix anything or give any money, but the buyer still has the right to do that. Okay. Also says common areas of planned developments, condominiums, stock cooperatives, and the like. Now, the agent inspection limitations, because the agent's duty is limited to conducting a reasonably competent and diligent visual inspection of reasonably and normally accessible areas, there are several things that the agent will not do. What follows is non-exclusive list of examples of limitations on the scope of the agent's duty. Agent will not climb onto a roof or into an attic. I don't even know how home inspectors do it. Anyone been to a home inspection and see the inspector just bouncing up and down the roof like it isn't no thing? Like, wow, I guess they get used to it. Agent will not move or look under or behind furniture, pictures, wall hangings, or floor coverings, not look into chimneys, into cabinets, or open locked doors. Okay. Now they don't have to, but do they? Some of them do, because sometimes there might be concerns and they might aid in assisting and revealing those concerns. Okay. But you don't have to. Exterior appliances, systems, really these issues right here, if not most of them, the home inspector, that's what they're for. They're getting paid to get, to get dirty. And then with the environmental hazards, we have what's called a natural hazard disclosure in the transaction. It's a third-party report by environmental companies that tell you whether you're in an area that has, I don't know, if they're under a flight path for an airport or next to a freeway or close to a former dump site or something like that. So we have third-party reports for this stuff. Off-property conditions, agents not obligated to pull permits or inspect public records and so forth. Now, don't have to. Me, myself, just because, I've got experience and I know I'm not just going to hand things over and tell everybody, take my word for it, here it is. No, it's like, I'd like to know so I can recommend to others to look deeper into it and find out for themselves. That's how I do it. Okay. And not always if just things seem to be in order and the basics are there. And I will get some really savvy sellers that say, I know everything about this property. I got the whole file here. Great. It's already done. The work's already done. Okay. Let's go to the second page of this. Now, what they're looking for in your obvious and visible disclosure is they're really looking for you to tell the tale of what you see in that property and where you're actually there. That's what matters most, besides pointing out anything that might be obvious and visible. So what you do is you go room to room and you give your observation. Pretty plain and simple, but you're not giving your observation from the standpoint of describing what you see as damage and then giving the story of how you think it happened and how you think it could be fixed. You're just telling the obvious and visible. So let's say, for example, I walked into a living room. I don't see any holes in the wall, any stains in the ceiling, any cracked tiles on the floor or ripped carpet or anything like that. So I'll just describe the room, some characteristics of the room to show that I've been there. So I may say wood type flooring, and that's important right there. I don't say wood flooring or anything specific. I had a friend, got a lot of friends that have had a lot of things happen to them, who had a property years ago, and they said wood flooring, hardwood floors. It turns out that the buyer in the end leveraged them by letting them know these aren't hardwood floors. These are like engineered, pressed, whatever, and called them out on it. What do? They asked for credit for false advertising. Things were a little different years ago, but still now you could have someone that calls you out and says, well, you said it was wood floors. It's not really wood. That's false advertising. You also said it on the MLS, false advertising, all that. So get used to using certain vanilla generic descriptions of things too. So here I would put wood type flooring. So if someone called me out, I could say, well, I didn't say it was exactly wood. I said it looked like wood. It looks like a wood type of flooring, maybe not specifically. Even pressed wood is, still has some wood in it. So don't get too specific unless it's a no-brainer thing like that's a ceiling fan. That's what it is. It's on the ceiling. It's a fan. It's got light. That's what it is. But floorings, there's different materials or different types and so forth. So I will usually get a generic word in there like type or kind of wood, kind of flooring, wood type of flooring. If you don't see anything, like I said, any damage in the room, just give a characteristic description. Same thing with the kitchen, wood type flooring, granite type counters, possible patch at ceiling. Is that a patch at the ceiling or a bad paint job? I don't know, but it looks like a patch. So I'm going to say possible patch. Okay.
Hey, Frank,
Yes.
if in the description, the MLS description, they say laminate flooring, do they have to say laminate flooring there, or can they say something else? Does it
Well,
have
they should try and match their stories. If they say laminate flooring on the MLS and then, well, actually, let's say they said engineered wood flooring in the MLS and then it's really laminate and they put that in their Avid. It's not, the stories don't match. Could you call them out on it? Maybe you could say, you know what, that's false advertising. My argument to that was, you've been here how many times now? And then you got accepted and you're having your inspection now. You didn't know. As a listing agent, try and be as accurate as possible. If you don't push the cusp and the border lines. If you don't know for sure about something, but you feel like, wow, that'd be a neat thing to push on the MLS to attract buyers, unless you're really absolutely sure, don't do it. Just don't do it. Find out for sure. And if you know for sure those are quartz countertops and not mock quartz countertops, but you feel like, who's going to know the difference? Well, the inspector, maybe the agent who's really savvy, whatever, and then you get found out. And it gets thrown at you, against you. So try not to get too specific unless you absolutely have the specifics. And don't try and be a contractor. Well, in this room, I see a stain in the ceiling with possible mold. Well, you're not a biologist or a scientist. Do you know that's possible mold? Well, no, but it looks like it. Okay, but you're not a licensed certified professional to make that declaration. So don't do it. Possibly caused by a leaky roof and could be fixed by abating. And we're not doing that. We're not contractors. What do I say? Stain at the ceiling. That's it. I'll let the inspector, I'll point it out to him. Hey, there's a stain at the ceiling. Can you see what's on the other side of that? Or maybe you notice a roof leak up there. And now we got a better idea of what it might be. The buyer's concerned about it. What are we doing? We're bringing a contractor in now, like a contractor. Remember, a home inspector is kind of like a jack of knowledge of all things, but they're not the specific professional trade person for that specific thing. So you see something in the attic that might be a roof issue. The the home inspector may point it out because they, that's what they do. They kind of, they're the red flag person. I'm giving you the heads up. But if you want to be specific now, schedule a roofer to come in and tell you like the real deal and what it's going to cost. Okay. So we're not contractors. We're just giving obvious invisibles. And some homes are not going to have damage or something to point out. So just point out a characteristic, a possible type of flooring, like I said, a ceiling fan, some characteristic of the room. Now I put this in all of my avids, even if it's my own buyer, I am putting my own disclosure in here. I put buyer's agent recommends the buyer perform a professional home inspection and perform thorough research with the city, county in which this property sits regarding all aspects of this home, including any construction records and all previous or existing violations or non-permitted items. That's pretty clear, right? And this is for my buyer. But I'm pretty clear there. And in regular, simple English too, I, of course, tell my buyers, did you go to the city yet? Did you ask all the questions you need to know there? Did you check up into the permits, like the MLS says new roof, you find a roof permit there? How about, checking any zoning changes or anything like that that's happening in the future, developments going on around, this is where you're going to live. It's good for you to know all this stuff. Are they expanding that airport over there? What's going on? You really need to be encouraging, recommending of, not pressuring, but in a way, yeah, you want them to do that. I do it in writing. I have this, of course, my avid. I will send them in my disclosures. When I send them the disclosures that the seller sends to me and I'm sending them my avid, I also put there again in writing, please go to the city, do your due diligence, check into everything, look into the schools, look into anything you want to look into about this neighborhood, about the city, about the zoning, about everything. Okay. I also tell them buyer's agent recommends the buyer perform a professional home inspection, of course. Per the inspection report, I recommend that the buyer have the home inspected by specialists if there's any concerns, including roof, plumbing, electric, heating, AC systems, foundation. So if the home inspector, who's not the specific specialist in each one of these, but they give the heads up, there might be something, then let's bring in one of these folks. The certified people, the contractors, to take a closer look and give us a more professional opinion. I also ask that the buyer review all the disclosures, the reports, including the prelim, the title report, the NHD, that's the natural hazard disclosure report. And I also recommend that they rekey the entire home immediately after taking physical possession of the home. Okay. So the reason I recommend this, because it's not necessarily a funny story, but years ago, okay, so there's a seller selling a property, buyer buying a property. It was supposed to be a 30-day escrow. It ended up being shorter because buyer's lender was just jamming. They were just really on top of things. So instead of closing in 30 days, it ended up closing in like 25 days. So the sellers really weren't living there. They already had their retirement home and they were just kind of coming back here and getting stuff here and there. They also had a son that was off to college and they weren't communicating there. So the son came back for a weekend, I think it was a holiday weekend, and had a key to the property, but escrow had just closed that day. They didn't tell the son the escrow closed. So when the son came over and saw literally nothing there, they had a sleeping bag and whatever. The son proceeds to order a pizza and get a 12-pack, decides to have their one-man party there. New buyers show up. Okay. The next day, actually, the new buyers show up. They walk in the property. They see this guy on a sleeping bag, half-eaten box of pizza, 12-pack wiped out, whatever, and they're just startled. we're calling the cops. The guy wakes up like, well, wait, what's going on? Who are you? We're the owners. Oh, wait a minute. You guys don't close escrow until next week. It had already closed. Buyers waited until the next day to go and get the key, do anything. It can happen. Stuff like that happens. So I encourage the buyer the day they get the property, if at all possible, get down there, at least change the front door lock or something. Because people behind you can still have keys. Things can happen. Okay, then we're going to describe, of course, the garage, the exterior, the front yard, backyard, and then anything that might be observed or known to you. Okay. Fill it all out, nice and neat, and signature. Boom. Those 3 disclosures for most standard transactions, important. Take some time. When I'm a listing agent, even before we go into contract with the buyer, I put these are the disclosures I put in front of my seller, and I'm usually going to be there too. I'm going to sit down there with them for an hour or 2 and go through these in detail and, you know, encourage and stress to them to look, just my opinion is open disclosure. Don't hold back. Some agents will, upon getting the listing signed, bring all the disclosures for the seller to do at that same point. That can be agonizing for a seller. And I think mistakes can be made, things can be forgotten, because the seller's adrenaline from just signing the listing agreement can throw them into a funk. So I usually will have that listing agreement signed, and I'll tell them, I'm going to come back tomorrow and we're going to fill out some disclosures ahead of time so that when we're ready to move forward with a buyer, you're not scrambling to fill things out, because there are a couple of important disclosures that we really need some quality time spent to fill out completely. Try and do it the next day or within 48 hours. I try and get it done. Definitely before you start moving forward with a buyer, because then you'll scramble and sellers are just, once again, their anxiety level's high because it was high when they were signing the listing agreement. Now it's high because, wow, they're getting ready to open escrow. And they're forgetful, they're sidetracked, they're distracted. Okay. Now the ESD we went to briefly. The ESD is the exempt seller disclosure, and this is involved in a transaction when, like I said, that when the seller is exempt from the TDS and the SBQ. It does ask basically some of the questions, actually all of the questions on page 1 of the SBQ. Within the last 3 years, has there been a death on the property, and so forth. Now, a quick story for those of you who haven't heard it before, and you probably have, most of you, is I had a property in Downey, and it was a foreclosure property. I was assigned to it. I did what's called a cash for keys, where I approached the property, and the former owner still lived there, although the property had gone through foreclosure and was now on title for the bank that owned it now. And I worked out a cash for keys, meaning, hey, in 30 days, I'm going to come back here. All your stuff, if it's gone, everything inside, outside, curb, garage, nothing can be here, and I'll give you $15,000. How about that? Start your new life. Seller agreed, or former owner agreed. I show up, and I'm asking him some final questions after I did my check to make sure everything's clear from the place. It turns out that while I'm asking them any issues with the roof or plumbing, any history of maintenance problems, they said, no, it's been a great house. But every once in a while, I kid you not, they said the spirit or ghost of this Native American man and his son will roam the hallways or sometimes stand at the foot of our bed. I swear, that's what they told me. And I'm pretty good at keeping a poker face. So I just said, okay, you said the spirit of roams the hallway. And I just said, okay. So then I gave them their check and sent them on their way. Well, I continue to do what I'm supposed to do, which is be at the property and do now my overall report of the ins and outs of this property, basically like an Avid, but more in more detail because it was a bank property. While I'm outside, the gentleman across the street watering the grass, he kept, staring over there, wondering what's going on. Finally, he said, hey, fella, what's going on over there? So I go over there, I give him a card. My name's Frank. I'm now responsible for the property. It's been foreclosed on, so on and so on. And he goes, what a shame. They were such nice people and a great house. But hey, have you seen the spirit? Wow. Okay. You heard about that? He goes, oh yeah, everybody knows about that. 5 minutes later, still outside, and old lady walks by with her dog. I love that house. I love that driveway because it was the only one on the street that had this arch driveway. And she says, same thing. Have you seen the ghost? I said, wow. That's what I mean by the neighbors know this stuff. It could come up. You don't disclose it and think that, nobody will ever. Somebody could know. Somebody could find out. Somebody could get triggered. Somebody can get really upset and get legal on you. Now in that, what did I do? The bank was now the owner. Are they exempt from things? Yes, but this is the rumor house. This is the haunted house on the block. So I just told the asset manager, my professional opinion is that we just put it in the disclosures. I actually put it in the Avid that per the previous owner, they state that they had seen this apparition, whatever. I got to look for that thing. This was like 14 years ago. I'm going to look for that disclosure. But guess what? A buyer got into escrow, got the disclosure, signed the darn thing, gave it back. Agent called me 30 minutes after I sent it to them. And they were laughing like, you weren't kidding, because I told everybody ahead of time, if we accept your offer in the disclosures, it's going to say something like this. And she thought it was funny. But at the same time, like, wow, you're serious. You put it in there. I'm going to talk to my buyer about it. Buyer didn't care. They were getting a deal, smoking deal. It was a great house. So reveal everything. Don't hold back anything. Like I said, what gets you into trouble is not over disclosing, it's under disclosing. It could be a very, very big problem. When it looks like you're sweeping under the rug, you don't have a lot of defense for that. Things get found out.
So when they say about the ghosts, like they take a walk, I mean, are they saying that they could see them, or
They
it's
said that
just
they would see him, a man and his child, two spirit, like roaming the hallways.
so they can actually see them?
That's what they
Wow.
said. And she had the seller lady, probably, I don't know, early 40, mid 40s or something like that.
Mhm.
And the daughter, one daughter was late teens, the other one was like early 20s. And they all said, yeah, we've all seen him.
Seen them. Wow, that's
And I wasn't, I'm not one to tell them, wow, I can understand one crazy person, but three, they're just, what do you say? There's a little bit more to the story because I had a maintenance, husband and wife maintenance people that would come to me when I would do this, when I would, finally take possession of the property, and they were there to wipe things down and sweep things up and all that stuff. While we were inspecting the property before I give the check to the previous owner, we were walking down the hallway. I kid you not, I'm getting goosebumps right now every time. We're walking down this hallway because it was a pretty big house, over 3,000 square feet, big lot, 25,000 square foot lot. And this hallway was long and not very well lit.
Mhm.
And myself and the husband and wife were walking down the hallway, and the wife stops us and says, hold on, I'm feeling a presence here in the hallway. This is before what I was told by the previous owner.
That's freaky.
And the husband said to the wife, cut it out. And I said, what is going on? And he says, oh, she thinks she's got some kind of psychic powers, like some sixth sense or something like that. I said, oh, okay. So we continued through the house and everything looked good. They went to the kitchen to start, wiping some stuff down, whatever. And I said, okay, I'm going to go give this lady her check.
Mhm.
So I go, she tells me that. And I was just, like I said, I was like, whoa. I couldn't wait to get back in that house and go tell who actually that maintenance person is now one of the biggest agents in Southern California, very successful. And I'm happy I got her to get her license because she had just been talking about it and I encouraged her to do it. And she's just been a tremendous success. But I need to bring her in here sometime. She'll absolutely testify to this story because once I told her, she smacks her husband and says, I told you, I'm going to bring some sage here tomorrow and whatever to this place, whatever. And then she said, I'm going to go and talk to that lady. And she goes outside and the guy is looking at me like, are you messing around? I said, no, go out there and hear for yourself. He goes, that's crazy. That's crazy. But I'm just saying, just put it all on the table.
Yeah.
For the right price, there's a buyer for everything.
Mhm.
Foundation problems, mold issues, leaky roofs, noise nuisances, any of that stuff, you know.
So you said it was a smoking deal. So what was the deal? Do you remember?
Well, this was near the country club in Downey, near a golf course.
Mhm.
And it was a 3,000 plus square foot home on a 25,000 square foot lot, had like a basketball court and a pool and big yard, all this in the backyard. And I think at the time, a home like that was going for, let's say 1.3 million.
Mhm.
Might seem like a lot, but something like that's, you know, probably well over 2 now. But at that time, the bank, I think we sold it for like 850 or something like that, 900,000. You know,
Yes. Okay.
because things were tanking. They were like, hey, let's get what we can for it. And they wanted cash too at this particular asset manager for whatever reason. So, but things like that happened. It happens. It's better to put something like that in writing, have someone sign it, give it back to you, of course. And if they got an issue ever in the future, hey, right here, you signed it right there. That's not anybody's fault but you or your agents for not explaining it to you or you not reading it. That's the truth. I'm not a bad guy for feeling that way, but people need to read what you're putting in front of them. And agents, you need to do your best to explain what you're putting in front of them too. You know, so some people are just no brainer and they're like, hey, I don't care. I just want this house. But at least make the attempts in writing as much as possible too. Cash for keys is absolutely legal. Of course. Yeah. If there's a previous owner or a tenant or anything like that, absolutely. Now, when there is a tenant in the city of LA where it's under big time rent control besides our state rent control, you got to be very careful maneuvering around there. You got to make sure you're not stepping over any boundaries. And there's a lot of folks out there who know how to play the system. They know exactly how much that they should be getting in the eyes of the housing department, you know. So, but absolutely legal. If someone's willing to take compensation for vacating a property, absolutely. It's more illegal to threaten them, of course, and say, hey, you know what? I just want to go my way, you go yours. I'll help you get a new start. Here's some cash. Okay. For those of you who haven't done REO or foreclosure and are with EXP, I'd encourage you to go into the Revenos room. If you go into the world and you hit the drop downs there and you scroll down, there's a revenues room. Of course, you want to check the calendar. You have to check the EXP training and workshop calendar. You can get your REO certification for free right now. You can get your relocation specialist agent for free. If you just look at the calendar and see which days and times they're on, they're usually going to be 10 or 11 o'clock, either on a Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday. But go in there and get those free certifications because our company is developing some really, really good relationships with financial institutions and national relocation companies and the sort. So there might be some opportunities for you out there. Maybe even if you never done an REO in your life, They're giving some pretty good A through Z training about it. But it's not a glamorous life. The REOs back in the day, there's a lot of responsibility. I know a lot of people want to get into it, but you kind of have to be wired a little different. You have to be able to, like I said, approach people and, tell them that the home's no longer theirs. It can be crushing for people, or sometimes it's going beyond that. Sometimes they don't want to leave. You leave it up to the bank and the lawyers and the legal documentation to do that. But eventually, if you're an agent for an REO and it goes that distance, you're probably going to have to go to a sheriff lockout also, which is not fun. To see people being told by the sheriffs that you're leaving or we're forcibly removing you. It's quite an experience. So not a glamorous life, but could be business opportunity for you. All right. So we had a lot of fun talking about disclosures. There are multiple additional disclosures as well that are more like statement, seller sign, buyer sign things, but the SPQ, the TDS are the two where the seller really has to sit down and answer some yes and no's and give some explanations if there are any yeses, of course. So those are the three that you should focus on, along, of course, with the AVID, and that's the agent's opportunity to tell what they know about the property. All right. Any questions at all?
I have a question.
Voice, by the way. I know I always say that, at a certain time of the day, I start sounding like Clint Eastwood. Question, sorry.
I have a question.
Yes.
About the first document, the real estate transfer disclosure. Yeah, those 3 boxes in there. Like if I was selling my house, I would not know how to answer those. So can you explain a little bit?
The common one would be no substituted disclosures, meaning that you don't have anything in place of this document right here that's going to give them a better idea of what's going on. Like
Okay.
something like you had someone in escrow and they canceled, and that escrow canceled, and now you got a new buyer. You could possibly give them the home inspection that that previous buyer did, if they did. You could check that box and put additional inspection reports or disclosures and then give them that report. Okay. This one just means like, you know what, you're my first buyer. I'm just going to tell you everything I know. I don't have anything in replace of telling you what I know. So I'm just going to tell you what I know, And then this one is for any inspection reports completed pursuant to. Some buyers may want to have upfront inspections even before they go into escrow. Not very common. You would think it'd be more common because they want to know what's going on before they get under contract. That could be a timing thing though, too. Let's say you're competing against, who knows, 10 other buyers, and a listing agent and a seller might look at it as like, whoa, do we want to get into contract with this buyer who's already they're like having inspection and everything before we even got started with them, So the most common though is this, that they're not substituting this disclosure, this and the SPQ with anything else. And then of course the buyer, you want the buyer to have their own home inspection. Some buyers, there's an agent was helping a few months ago, and it happened like that where there was a buyer in front of them that fell out of escrow. So the buyer didn't want to spend $350, $400 on having an inspector go out. They were willing to just take the inspection report from the buyer that just canceled in front of them. Not a good idea, because you don't know if that buyer's how experienced they are or what level of experience they have or anything like that. I'd encourage my buyer to just have their own, have someone on their behalf only have their own inspection. Make sense?
Yes, thank you.
All right.
Frank,
Yes.
So I took that REO certification and it just sounded really scary. Like, did you have some scary run-ins?
Oh, my goodness, Misty. I think I've told you about the time I got trapped in a house off of 71st and Central by an entire gang
No, that's one
No.
hasn't been shared.
Quick story. Okay, so I had this REO assigned to me from a major bank. I won't name them. It starts with a B. And my job was they'd give me the assignment and I'd have to go there the same day to verify occupancy. See who's living there. Is it the now previous owner? Is it a tenant? Is it abandoned? What is it? So I show up to this property and right off the bat, I couldn't park right in the driveway. The parking was there were people parking in the driveway, so you couldn't drive up the driveway. And the place seemed abandoned. So I approached it and every window, every door had been kicked in. It was tagged all over inside. The bathrooms are just, oh man. Whew. After I went in there, I felt like I need to go home and take a shower, like a shower in alcohol or something. It was just nasty in there. So on site, I called my maintenance crew and I told them, I need you to come down here ASAP. I don't care what time, but you need to board every window, reattach the doors, board those up. You don't have to clean it right now, but I need to secure this place. It's just a disaster. So my maintenance guy calls me probably 9 p.m. and tells me we're done. And I don't know if we're coming back here. And I said, why? He said, it's a rough street. I said, okay, I get it. So that was on a Thursday, I believe. I had to go back there the next day to take pictures of the board up and everything like that. And so I go over there. It was a Friday. It was like mid-July. It was steaming hot on a Friday. And I put that one last on my list for the day to do my routine inspections. I shouldn't have done that because at that time of the day on a Friday, people were just hot and bothered. And, so I pulled up to take pictures. I had to park up the street about 40, 50 yards up the street because there was a car parked there again, right in the driveway. This little kid rolls up on a bike, must have been around 12 years old, shaved head, and he goes, hey, mister, you shouldn't be here. And I say, why is that? And he goes, because they're mad at you. And I go, who? And he goes, don't look over there. And I was like, oh, I looked already. And there's a bunch of fellas in the middle of the street walking down the street like a movie. And I go, why are they mad at me? He goes, this is their hangout or whatever. I'm like, oh man. So he takes off on the bike and I look over there and my car is in their direction. And I'm just saying to myself, I'm not going to make it to the car. So I start to walk forward, pretending I'm taking pictures. But as soon as I lost sight of them, I ran up to the door and it was like a horror movie where I'm scrambling with the keys, trying to find the right key. My maintenance person had put a board over the front door. And he put a latch also with a padlock. But I had told him to reattach the door on the inside. And thank goodness when I finally opened the padlock and opened the wooden part of the door, the actual door was reattached. Because all of a sudden I turn and I see them all running in my direction and I pull the door closed and I locked it. If he didn't reattach that door, I wouldn't have been able to secure the door. So all of a sudden I just felt a tremble and they're all banging on the outside on the boards and all that. And they're saying all kinds of terrible things. They're going to kill me. They're going to blast me. They're going to burn the house down, this and that. So I crawl on the floor with my phone and I call 911 and I'll never forget. The 911 dispatcher says, hello, what's your emergency? And I sounded like Dave Chappelle. I said, they're trying to kill me. Who's trying to kill you, sir? I said, I don't know. A bunch of guys, a gang, they're trying to kill me. I'm trapped in a house. I give her the address and she goes, oh, that's whatever station. And she transfers me. I'm like, oh my God. So I get on with the next person. What's your emergency? I tell them what's going on. And the lady says, okay, stay on the line. I'm sending units, all that stuff. Now, by this time I've crawled to the center of the house because I'm thinking, what if they do start shooting or start burning the place down or whatever? And I could feel the ick because I'm crawling in the dark except for the light of my phone. And it seemed like forever, but it was probably a couple of minutes at least. And then all of a sudden, the noise starts dying down. And then the noise stops, and then I hear screeching, like tires screeching and all that stuff. So the dispatcher says, officers are there or whatever. Go to the front door and do everything, listen to their every command. So I go to the front door, I open the door, and one of them's got a gun drawn on me. And another one walks over, this big fella, grabs me by the arm, pulls me down the stairs, puts me on the grass face down, and they're patting me down. And I had the biggest smile on my face. And the guy was like, wow, I've never seen anyone so happy to get patted down. And I said, I'm just so grateful you are here. And there were like 20 dudes trying to kill me here. So they, you know, they settle in with me and start asking me, okay, can you give any descriptions? So I described 20 gang members. And he said, okay, so, well, we can't arrest the whole block. Do you know any specifics, any specific characters? And I'm like, you know what? I was just running for my life. That's it. So they said, okay, what do you want to do? I said, I just want to get out of here, honestly. So they took me to my car, waited for me to pull out, escorted me up to the next major street, which was 1 block from the freeway. And I made my way out of there. I locked the place up, of course, but it was quite the experience. I actually contacted the asset manager and I told him, you know, what happened. And he said, oh, that's terrible. You know what? You don't have to go back there again. And
Well,
the way
that's-
I am, I just felt like, you know what? I don't want to lose this property. And I don't want the bank to think like, oh, he's easily spooked or anything like that. So I said, you know what? I'm going to keep it. I just need to be smarter about it. So I went back there on a Monday at 8 in the morning, 7:38 in the morning. And because my theory was, and my partner who unfortunately passed away a while back too, he used to say the same thing. Well, he used to say, hey, you know what? Always go early to the areas that you're concerned about, that you feel you need to be more cautious. You're just not comfortable. Just go earlier, because someone's mentality early in the morning is different than late in the afternoon, especially on a hot day and going toward the weekend. So I kept that rule. And then I would take things with me too, like snacks and drinks and gift cards. And from that point on, when I would go there and I encounter people, I'd kind of make friends in the neighborhood and build alliances, instead of being like the guy who comes in and took away some gang's party house, you know? So
Oh, that's scary, but that was smart. Take that street tax. In a way.
Tisha right here says you go early because those you are trying to avoid RS. Yeah. And my partner used to say, hey, the homies don't wake up till 10. So go early. So, but I got more stories that I will share in the future. But yeah, get those certifications, whether you have experience or not, you never know. To have the certification, and in the future, you never know. You might have those opportunities come along and you want to be prepared. So, any other questions before we call it a night?
You know, I wanted to comment on the disclosure, or the TDS and
SPQ.
SPQ and other
Mhm.
reports that were that can be done prior, or that were done prior to your previous buyer. So those that were in escrow are no longer in escrow, right? So you have a new buyer. They provide you with the reports and things of that sort, but
Yeah.
it's included in the counter. So it's because it's included in the counter. I mean, if they provide it to you and they state it on the counter, then you have the lender, if your buyer has a loan, the lender then questions all of that.
Who says to put it in the counter?
Well, that's what they did.
Well,
That was
we've
the
got-
experience I had. That's what
Yeah,
happened. And the,
Yeah.
yeah, go ahead.
We've got some unwritten rules in our industry, and they're not necessarily unwritten, not necessarily rules, but what's the best way to put it? I don't know if it's behaviors or just certain things that we do and certain ways we do it. And I'm glad you brought that up, because this is one I've always thought to myself as well. Let's say you have an inspection and the buyer wants to put in a request for repair. Okay, so the buyer puts in a request for repair and tells the seller, hey, based on my home inspection, I just want to point out to you the house has this and that issue and this issue and this issue, some more important than others. And I'd like you to fix these things or give me some credit so I can fix it myself. Now, me, myself, when I list a property and a buyer asks for a request for repairs or especially credit, I usually tell the seller, go with the credit, because you fix things, you might fix them on the cheap and they break down 6 months from now. That buyer is calling their agent's calling me, they're asking me to call you. Now we're bringing you back into the fold and you're just trying to move on with your life. Give them the credit, let them hire their contractor of choice and gripe to them if things don't stick. Okay, so buyer and seller agree to an amount. What do we do at that point? Do we hand over the request for repair to the lender to give to the underwriter, who is the risk manager? No, we don't. So we get that agreed amount. We do get the request for a repair signed and binding between the buyer and the seller, so you can hold them to it with that. But what do? We create an addendum. We get an addendum, and on there, we put the amount the seller is giving to the buyer. What do we put language in there? We put as closing costs, to the buyer's closing costs at the close of escrow. We don't put this is because of that heater that's on the recall unit known to burn homes down, or the leaky roof, or anything like that. Why? Because if you put that in that addendum, that this money is for this stuff, the risk manager, their duty is to assess risk, to call things out. The underwriter, the person at the back, basically if you want to call them detective, investigator, they're doing the CSI on the buyer's financials, credit, debt, all those things, but also on any health and safety issues with the property. The only way that they're clued into any kind of issues with the property is if the appraiser puts something in their report to the buyer. But we don't hand over inspection reports, SBQs, TDSs, anything like that over to the buyer's agent. Over to the lender to give to the underwriter, because the underwriters would tell you, those that are honest, that if you give me a reason to raise a red flag and ask for something to be looked into or a certified fix, then I have to do it because you gave me a reason. But if you put in front of me that the seller is giving the buyer this amount of credit for their closing costs and don't tell me why, I'm taking it at that. That's not triggering me. But triggering me is the seller is giving the buyer $8,500 because of a roof leak. Okay, well now I have to call it out, and I need that roof to get a roof certification, and you to show me that that roof has been patched and no longer leaking, and a roofer is giving some kind of guarantee, warranty on it for it to be good for however long. So here's the thing. The disclosures from the previous buyer, absolutely. I'm giving them to the next buyer. I'm giving any reports, anything like that. But I'm not mentioning anything in any counter or anywhere else that gets back to the lender. And actually, lenders would tell you themselves, not the underwriter, but lenders would tell you themselves when you hand them stuff like, whoa, don't give me this. Or go back and, change it from repairs, create a separate document and call it closing cost. Should we do that? I don't know. It's what we do. So, and I'm glad you brought that up though. But you're right. If it's in a counter, the counter, the RPA, all those things go to the underwriters. They absolutely look that over.
Mhm.
So if there's any mention of, like, let's say the buyer asks the seller to do termite work, guess what? Now the termite work has to be not just an inspection, but termite work has to be done so that the buyer gets a certification of termite clearance. And until that happens, now the underwriter is not going to sign off on the final approval. And even later on, if the buyer and the seller decide, you know what, we're going to X the termite. If the underwriter already got the termite report and sees it and they say this is a lot of stuff, it doesn't matter if the buyer and the seller don't want it anymore. Now the underwriter calls the shot and says, well, I don't care if you two want it or not. It has to be done if you want me to sign off on this. So I'm glad that you brought that up. We just, certain things we don't put in the eyes of even the lender. And especially so that they get past and through to the underwriter. But I'm telling you, it's funny because most lenders will tell you, don't write it that way. I can't give that to the person in back of me. We'll have problems if we do that. The lenders want the transaction to happen, and they're pretty good assessors of problems with the property. And there's certain things that they themselves would say too. Yeah, they have to know this. That makes sense. It's kind of like an unwritten way of doing things. That ever since I've been in the industry, that's how it's done. That clear?
That makes sense. Even lawyers, I mean, I've done that as a lawyer, like not that per se, but I've said, stop. I don't want to hear anymore.
Yeah, don't tell me that. I don't, because once I know that,
Yep.
my duty fiduciary to really both sides is it gives me dilemma in my head, and I don't want dilemma. I need to go in with my conscience focused on defending you or whatever, and that makes it difficult for me to do that, regardless if you're my client or not, But I'm sure underwriters, because I've had this talk with underwriters, and they themselves say, if you give me a reason to call it out, I'm going to call it out. If you don't, I'm not. Because they know in the middle of a transaction, all of a sudden the seller's giving closing cost credit to a buyer in the amount of $5,000. Was that out of the goodness of their heart? Probably not. It's probably because of repair. But if I don't know exactly what it is, then I'm not going to take an action for it. I'm just going to sign off on it. Yeah. All right. Good question. All right. Any other questions there? No. Okay. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. We're just over the 10 o'clock hour. Remember, tomorrow is Tech Tuesday with Coach Kane. And on Wednesday night, same time, same link, is property valuation, comping. I know Renee likes the other title, of course. And this Saturday, I will confirm this tomorrow, but this Saturday, we're having another Saturday. This Saturday is supposed to be comps and coffee and donuts. A couple of weeks ago, we had a good time. We had contracts and coffee. This Saturday, and I'll confirm it tomorrow, is going to be comps and coffee and donuts. So that's going to be in person at our Long Beach office. I encourage you to come down. We had quite a few people last time. We had a good conversation there. There's just something about being together live in a room, even when I'm doing contracts on Zoom. It just seems to be a different experience when we're doing it in person around each other, and kind of networking and getting to know each other and talk to other people in person. So try and join us. I'll confirm it tomorrow though, but it's more than likely going to be this Saturday from 10 to noon at the Long Beach office. All righty.
Wait, Frank, have you
Yes.
rescheduled the mortgage one?
Yeah, our mortgage person who fell ill last week is out of town this week. So I'm going to push it probably 2 weeks on a Wednesday likely. So not next Wednesday, but the following. And
Oh.
thank you very much for bringing that up. I'm gonna push it or promote it further ahead of time. I think it's very important to come down because he's going to do a better job at giving you some of the dialogue to talk to your buyers about to get them comfortable enough to talk to the lender, because that's half the battle right there. It's not that you're going to meet folks who, they want to become a homeowner. You know that that's their goal, it's their dream, but there's a fear factor. There's certain dialogue that you can have with them to ease them up and get them to take that first step to talk to the lender. Because until they do that, it's just a dream. It's not a reality. And the thing is, sometimes someone wants to buy, but they're not mentally ready to buy. And then when they're mentally ready to buy, they finally talk to the lender and they find out they're not financially ready to buy. And it's crushing. It might be like, well, you know what? I waited until May because June's right around the corner. But now the lender's telling me I got to work on some credit. I won't be ready to buy until August. So I'm going to miss all those summer home opportunities because I was too scared to talk to a lender and find out where I was 3 months ago. So I could have fixed these issues and been ready to buy now. But instead I waited because I was just so scared. Like I didn't want the news then, but now that I'm ready to buy and I'm getting the news and it's not great, fixable, but time consuming to fix. And now I'm not ready to buy. Mentally I am, financially I'm not. I should have just talked to a lender 3-4 months ago. So these are some of the things that Rob's going to talk about, as well as explaining the differences between the different types of loan products. So
I-
be
that's
there.
great.
Yes. Okay. Thank you all very much for joining us tonight. If you have any questions, please feel free to respond to the invite I gave you in the email, or go ahead and text me. I'm going to put my number real quick and then we're off to, well, you're off to bed, but I'm off to being up all night doing real estate stuff. There's my direct number. If you ever have any questions, contracts, disclosures, all things transactions, feel free to text me. My office hours are 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. 7 days a week, pretty much. I'm here for you. And do remember tomorrow with Kane at 8, same link, and Wednesday with Renee, same link. All right,
Thank you.
everyone. Have a fantastic
you.
night.
Nice.
Thank you.
Right.